They say that only the paranoid style their way through life. But what if the paranoid were right? What if they have good reason to fear the people around them? When it comes to this story, that's exactly what happened. Welcome to my channel. And today let's find out how East Germany perfected surveillance. The year is 1978. Wolfgang Templin walks home after spending the day at his workplace. He works at a machine tool plant where he's employed as an engineer. But Templar is not just any citizen of East Germany. Since 1964, he has been a thorn in the side of the East German government. That's because he organized small discussions in people's homes about human rights. These discussions attracted many people who wanted to openly talk about topics the government had put under lock and key. Of course, such talks did not remain hidden from the authorities forever. And when they were found out, Wolfgang became a marked man. Those watching him are known as the Stasi, short for Ministry for State Security. They are East Germany's version of the FBI and the CIA combined, and their mission, to keep tabs on anyone who threatens the German Democratic Republic, or the DDR as it was called, and its communist government. To put it mildly, the Stasi hated Wolfgang for the so-called round table talks that he organized, which directly challenged the authority of the government. But still, they couldn't just arrest him. For one thing, arresting someone without proper evidence would reflect poorly on the efficiency of the Stasi. And secondly, they knew that any trial would be a media circus. People were well aware of the government's human rights issues and would not take kindly to a trial that looked like nothing more than a kangaroo court. So instead, the Stasi devised a more subtle plan to get rid of Templin and anyone else who posed a threat to the state. To understand their plan, we need to first learn about the extent of their power. To spy on Templar, the Stasi employed at least 10 collaborators. There were 3 full-time Stasi officers assigned to him. Then there were 3 informants who fed the Stasi information about Templar. 2 of these informants were women Templar had relationships with, one of whom worked as a waitress at a local pub, and the other was his former wife. Lastly, there was a courier who delivered messages between the Stasi officers and informants. This level of resources dedicated to keeping tabs on a single person shows just how serious the Stasi took threats to the state. But this kind of surveillance was not reserved only for high-profile targets like Templin. In fact, almost every citizen of East Germany was under some level of surveillance. Even the elite members of the Socialist Unity Party, or the SED, were not spared. The SED was the ruling party in East Germany, and its leaders enjoyed a certain amount of privilege that commoners did not. However, the Stasi kept a close eye on them, too. If you can imagine, the Stasi spied on high-ranking government officials to collect dirt on them. This could then be used as leverage if the person ever did something that displeased the government. Or it could be used to blackmail them into doing what the government wanted. In other words, if you were in the government and you didn't like the smell of that sweet communist power, then the Stasi had something that could make you change your mind. The Stasi did not limit themselves to just following people around and listening in on conversations. They also collected every piece of information they could get their hands on. This included personal details like medical records, bank statements, and even school reports. By gathering all this information, they tried to build a complete picture of the person, including their private thoughts and opinions. This was especially useful when it came to targeting people like Templin who had expressed interest in human rights. The Stasi could use this information to find out who else shared similar views and then target them as well. One of the most chilling aspects of the Stasi's surveillance was the fact that they were everywhere. There were Stasi agents working as postal workers who opened and read people's mail. Others worked as teachers and doctors who had access to people's private information. And still others were simply members of the community who had been paid off by the Stasi to keep an eye on their neighbors. This created a climate of fear and mistrust. Citizens of East Germany could never be sure who to trust, and that was exactly what the Stasi wanted. The scale of the Stasi's operations is hard to overstate. At its peak in the late 1970s, it employed around 100,000 people. Around half of these were civilian employees, and the rest were full-time secret police. The Stasi's budget was around $1.5 billion in 1989, which was around 2% of the East German government's total expenditure. In comparison, West Germany spent around 1.3% of its budget on defense. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Stasi was the fact that it was completely legal. The East German government justified its actions by claiming that it was necessary to protect the state from enemies both foreign and domestic. The government also claimed that the Stasi's activities were limited to those who had actually broken the law or were suspected of planning to break it. However, this was not true. The Stasi had a free hand to arrest and detain anyone it wanted without charging them with a crime. In fact, many people were arrested simply for expressing their political views or for trying to leave East Germany. One of the main tools used by the Stasi to maintain control was fear. The secret police knew that most people would do anything to avoid being arrested or sent to prison. This is why they did not hesitate to use violence when necessary. In fact, Stasi officers were trained to use force to achieve their objectives. They were also given wide-ranging powers to stop them from being sued for their actions. The Stasi's surveillance apparatus was so extensive that it was able to keep tabs on just about everyone in East Germany. In fact, around 1 in 20 adults were under some level of surveillance. This meant that people were constantly on edge, knowing that their every move was being watched, and if they said or did something that the government didn't like, they could be arrested without warning. This kind of constant surveillance creates a society of informants where everyone is suspicious of one another. After all, how could they be sure that their neighbor wasn't a Stasi informant? This atmosphere of suspicion made it difficult for people to trust each other, even family members and friends. And speaking of distrust, the Stasi even turned people's own family members against them. As mentioned earlier, the Stasi had informants who were romantic partners of their targets. This meant that people could be betrayed by the very people they loved. It's hard to imagine a more intimate betrayal than that. As you can see, the Stasi was a powerful and pervasive force in East German society. Its surveillance apparatus was so extensive that it was able to keep tabs on just about everyone in the country. The secret police were not afraid to use violence or intimidation to achieve their goals, and they had the power to arrest and detain people without charging them with a crime. This created a society of fear where people were constantly on edge, and where trust was difficult to come by. However, despite all this, people still managed to resist the Stasi. Some did so openly, while others took a more clandestine approach. Whatever their methods, all of them deserve our admiration for standing up to one of the most feared and powerful organizations in history. So how did the Stasi keep track of everything going on in East Germany? You're probably wondering, what was the biggest operation of them all? We have already told you about how the Stasi employed thousands of people to keep tabs on citizens. But what we haven't told you is about one of their most ambitious projects, Operation Hope. Covertly situated in the middle of East Berlin, it was a nondescript building that looked like any other apartment building in the area. However, it was far from ordinary. Hidden behind its plain facade was a sophisticated surveillance center that was responsible for opening and recording the contents of tens of thousands of letters and packages sent to and from East Germany. The building was disguised as a post office and served as the central hub for the Stasi's mail operation. When a letter or package addressed to someone in East Germany arrived at the post office, it was immediately taken to the basement of the building where a team of Stasi agents would open it and examine its contents. Any letters deemed to be of interest to the Stasi were then recorded and filed for later review. The agents would look for signs of political dissent, such as criticism of the government or requests for asylum in the West. They would also search for letters that contained personal information that could be used to blackmail or intimidate the recipient. It's hard to overstate the importance of this operation to the Stasi. By monitoring the mail of citizens, the secret police were able to gather a tremendous amount of intelligence on what was happening in East Germany. They learned about people's opinions of the government long before they were expressed publicly, and they were able to identify potential threats to the state before they had a chance to organize. What makes Operation Hope particularly chilling is the fact that it was completely legal. The Stasi had the authority to open and read people's mail without a warrant or any other legal justification. This was done in the name of national security, of course, but it was really just another example of the lengths to which the Stasi would go to maintain control over the populace. Overall, Operation Hope was a massive undertaking that involved hundreds of agents and resulted in the collection of thousands of intelligence reports each year. It was one of the largest and most ambitious surveillance projects ever undertaken, and it was a key part of the Stasi's efforts to keep East Germany under its thumb. Now check out How Does the NSA Spy on You and Your Friends in America? Or watch Why Does China Spy on Americans?